It was beginning winter, and in between time, the landscape still partly brown. The bones of weeds kept swinging in the wind above the blue snow. It was beginning winter. The light moved slowly over the frozen field, over the dried seed crowns, the beautiful surviving bones swinging in the wind. Light traveled over the wide field, stayed. The weeds stopped swinging. The mind moved, not alone, through the clear air in the silence. Was it light? Was it light within? Was it light within light? Stillness becoming alive, yet still? A lively, understandable spirit once entertained you. It will come again. Be still. Wait.
Because Roethke continued to be so excited and anxious, his teaching suffered. Friends of his took him to Albany General Hospital around Christmas time, 1945. After a few weeks of treatments, he was taken to a nursing home in Albany. Doctors diagnosed him with manic depressive disorder, what is sometimes called bipolar today. The diagnosis was similar to the one made by Michigan doctors when Roethke was 27. According to the biography of Theodore Roethke, The Glass House, Roethke did not suffer from this disorder until he was an adult. Unfortunately, he would suffer 2 more attacks before realizing this disorder would be with him for the rest of his life. This particular time, in January 1946, Jim Jackson took his friend to Saginaw to rest. Roethke moved in once again with his mother and sister, and he continued writing and revising the poetry he began in Vermont. Since Roethke did not know how to type, his sister June, an English teacher at South Middle School in Saginaw, typed her brother's poems for him. Roethke accepted the Guggenheim Fellowship in the spring of 1946, and the collection of poems, known generally as the Greenhouse Poems, was published in March of 1948. Roethke was nearly 40 years old. The book was called The Lost Sons and Other Poems. Later collections of poetry would be written in different styles, becoming much more mystical and lyrical. But the themes of Roethke's poetry did not change much from these Greenhouse Poems.
Cuttings later. This urge, wrestle, resurrection of dry sticks, cut stems struggling to put down feet. What saint strains so much, rose on such lopped limbs to a new life? I can hear, underground, that sucking and sobbing. In my veins, in my bones, I feel it. The small waters seeping upward, the tight grains parting at last. When sprouts break out, slippery as fish, I quail, lean to beginnings, sheath wet.
Ted and his sister June were the only children born to Otto and Helen Roethke. Ted was born in this house on Gratiot Street in Saginaw on May 25, 1908. 2 years later, they moved to this house a few blocks away, next to Otto's brother Carl, who later changed his name to Charles. Together, Otto and Charles ran the extensive Roethke greenhouse business, with Charles handling mostly business affairs and Otto running the day-to-day matters of the greenhouses that ran directly behind their 2 homes. This was the childhood home of the poet-to-be, rich in sensations of earth, loam, flowers, vegetables, and the small creatures that inhabit such a landscape. Years later, Roethke himself wrote, "My father's chief interest was the growing of flowers. When the firm was at its height, it took up 25 acres within the city of Saginaw, with 250,000 feet under glass. Some of the florists were wonderful men, trained in the botanical gardens, an absolute law unto themselves, who my father let alone, but the working crew usually included a half-dozen misfits, old punchy animal trainers, or people my father just liked to have around.
Okay, Alan Seeger tells the story, and the Saginaw News files confirm that there was a horrendous storm that hit this area at one point. The wind blew so hard it blew the river water right up and out and became very, very dry, which of course imperiled the Roethke greenhouse because they used that water to heat their pipes to keep their greenhouses warm. So what to do, so they, what does greenhouse have a lot of? Manure. So they used manure to heat the pipes, which created a bit of a stench, but it did at least save the roses. So it is suspected that this particular poem is based on that incident, and it's called Big Wind, appropriately. Where were the greenhouses going? Lunging into the lashing wind, driving water so far down the river all the faucets stopped. So we drained the manure machine from the steam plant, pumping the stale mixture into the rusty boilers, watching the pressure gauge waver over to red as the seams hissed and the live steam drove to the far end of the rose house. Where the worst wind was, creaking the cypress window frames, crackling so much thin glass, we stayed all night, stuffing the holes with burlap. But she rode it out, that old rose house. She hove into the teeth of it, the core and pith of that ugly storm, pawing with her stiff prow, bucking into the wind waves that broke over the whole of her, flailing her sides with spray, flinging long strings of wet across the rooftop, finally veering, wearing themselves out, merrily whistling thinly under the wind vents. She sailed until a calm morning, carrying her full cargo of roses.
And this is where Otto used to come in the morning for coffee to discuss business with Carl. Only the original entrance was this way.
My father, Carl Roethke, was Bud's Roethke's half-brother, and Bud and Carl were Ted Roethke's first cousins. In fact, Carl and Bud grew up next door to Ted. Bud, being older than Carl, was close to Ted's age. And when Ted wrote my dimwit cousin, he was referring to Bud Roethke. My dimwit cousin, saved by a deathbed quaver, your little manhood long ago was smothered, but for an uncle you were thought to favor, those doting aunties never would have bothered. The cost of folly is forever mounting. Your bed collapses from imagined sins. Deterioration, scrupulous accounting, adds up a pair of jiggling double chins. Your palm is moist, your manner far too jolly. Today, while scraping hair before the mirror, my shaving hand jerked back in sudden terror. I heard your laughter rumble from my belly.
Another poem in that group I remember just being so thrilled about because it was just so happy is this poem, Child on Top of a Greenhouse. The wind billowing out the seat of my breeches, my feet crackling splinters of grass and dried putty, the half-grown chrysanthemums staring up like accusers up through the street glass, flashing with sunlight, a few white clouds all rushing eastward, a line of elms plunging and tossing like horses, and everyone pointing up and shouting. So yeah, I mean, when I've read comments on this poem, people talk about, you know, the ominous note there because it's actually a kid who's up there and the kid could get killed. Yeah, that's true and that's there, but that's not what the poem's about. The poem's about this kid just feeling great while walking around on top of the greenhouse roof. And the poet, at whatever time he comes back to that memory, just wants to primarily wants to celebrate that moment of ecstasy in the wind on top of a greenhouse in Saginaw.